Is Richard Dawkins a cultural Christian? This is the topic we're going to be jumping in today. We're going to be talking about cultural Christianity. What is cultural Christianity? And what is going on with one of the world's most famous atheists? He went viral about 3 or 4 months ago. It was right around Easter time. And he made the radically outlandish claim that he was a cultural Christian. So we're going to be reacting to what Richard Dawkins said. And we're going to dive into what does it mean when Richard Dawkins says that he is a cultural Christian? What is he talking about? And so we're going to jump into the topic.
Professor Dawkins, it's very good to have you join us to discuss whether it matters that Christianity is playing a diminishing role in national life. Welcome to LBC.
Thank you.
And what would be your Easter message? I've said a few things. What would you tell the nation?
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense.
Okay, I need to stop it here. You guys, this is not the Richard Dawkins I grew up with. Okay, I grew up with a Richard Dawkins who, at the time, in the 90s, in the early 2000s, he was a part of a group that was called the New Atheists. That's what they call themselves, the New Atheists. And at the time, it was literally their mission to kill Christianity. Really, in the West, this was their mission. And so for me, this is shocking to hear him say these things. Never in my wildest dreams did I think this guy would ever say these words. And let me show you why. This is absolutely radical. What is going on here?
The best candidate, I suppose, for strident in the God delusion, maybe the only one, is the opening 2 sentences of...
Okay, so in this video, Richard Dawkins, he actually wrote a book called The God Delusion, in the book, he basically puts forth his thesis of really why it's stupid to believe in God in general. And really, he puts out this argument that says all religion is dangerous. And so he's actually going to quote the book that he read. So this video is about, I think it's 13 years old. The original recording is probably older than that. Let's see what Richard Dawkins had to say about the God of the Bible 13 to 15 years ago.
The opening 2 sentences of chapter 2. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
So, that's Richard Dawkins and what he thinks of the God of the Bible. Okay? He has literally devoted his entire life to eliminating really faith at all, but to eliminating the God of the Bible really from the West. This is his mission in life. He's literally dedicated his life to accomplishing this, to eradicating the Christian faith. And then, think about this. Does that guy sound like this guy?
What would you tell the nation?
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believer.
So he calls himself a cultural Christian after really cursing God and saying that God is worse than the devil, is basically what he says. And now fast forward 13 years, and he says this.
Believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. It's true that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it would matter if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful.
Well, which brings me to my supplementary point, which is that, as we know, church attendance is plummeting, but the erection of mosques.
So he says that church attendance is going down, and he's quite happy about that, right? So he, he's accomplishing his mission when he hears that church attendance is going down, right? And so you would think he's getting everything he ever wanted. But let's see.
Across Europe, I think 6,000 are under construction, and there are many more. Are being Europe. I think six.
Okay, so she says that 6,000 mosques are being built across Europe. So what's happening is the new atheists is they haven't eliminated religion. What they've done is they've taken away the Christians. Really, Christianity has plummeted. And now a different religion, really, if we're honest, a more violent religion, Islam, is replacing Christianity.
6,000 are under construction, and there are many more, are being planned. So do you regard that as a problem? Do you think that matters?
Yes, I do, really. I have to choose my words carefully. If I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I choose Christianity every single time. It seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion.
Okay.
In a way that I think Islam...
Okay, remember what he just said. He just said if he has to choose between Christianity and Islam, he would choose Christianity every single time. That's what he said. He said he would choose Christianity every single time. And then he said Christianity is a fundamentally decent religion. Listen to what he says about Christianity again, 13 years ago.
The best candidate, I suppose, for strident in the God delusion, maybe the only one, is the opening two sentences of chapter 2. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
Does that sound like a decent religion to you? Right? Do you see like somebody who is known for using logic and somebody that's known for his intellect, something is not adding up here.
And it's not.
I think you're going to have to explain why you say that, Professor Dawkins. Why is...
So obviously she's saying that because she's been listening to his speeches like throughout her life as well, right? And so, yeah, and I think if you're going to rail against the God of the Bible for your entire career, and then you say it's a fundamentally decent religion, yeah, we're gonna have some questions for you. So let's see if he's able to give any decent answers to this.
Is Islam fundamentally not decent like Christianity?
Yes, I mean the way women are treated. I mean, Christianity is not great about that. It's had its problems with female vicars and female bishops and things, but there's an active hostility to women, which is promoted, I think, by the holy books of Islam. I'm not talking about individual Muslims, who of course are quite different, but the doctrines of Islam, the Hadith and the Quran, is fundamentally hostile to women, hostile to gays. And I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
Just for balance, should we say?
Okay, so there we have it. Okay, so like, what exactly is he saying? Because he's saying that he's a cultural Christian. How can you be a cultural Christian and not believe a word of the religion? Well, really what it comes down to is Richard Dawkins really likes the fact that Christianity has good fruit, right? Like, for example, some of the best quoted verses of Jesus teaches to turn the other cheek. When Islam teaches if somebody steals from you, you cut off the hand they stole with. Like, if you go into countries like Iran, countries like Saudi Arabia, we're talking really violent. Islam is a very violent religion in some of these Middle Eastern countries, where literally people are still beheaded today. Like, the idea of human rights doesn't exist in the same way in the Islamic worldview as it does in the Judeo-Christian worldview. So there is a British historian. His name is Tom Holland, not Spider-Man, but a different Tom Holland. He wrote this book. It's called Dominion. So Tom Holland, he's actually a historian, and he has devoted a greater part of his life to studying Greek history, studying Roman history, and he's also done quite a bit of work in the Islamic world as well, studying the history of Islam, primarily in the Middle Ages. And a few years ago, he was in an interview on the Unbelievable podcast, in which he had this to say, which I think this is worth mentioning as we have this conversation about cultural Christianity. What exactly are we talking about when we talk about cultural Christianity? Well, according to Holland, it actually has to do with worldview.
Cicero's great contemporary Caesar is, by some accounts, slaughtering 1 million Gauls and enslaving another 1 million in the cause of boosting his political career. And far from feeling in any way embarrassed about this, he's kind of promoting it. And so when he holds his triumph, people are going through the streets of Rome carrying billboards, boasting about how many people he's killed. And this is...
So Tom Holland is talking about Caesar and the way Caesars thought about human rights before Jesus, right? So he's talking about the worldview of the ancient world before Jesus, and the worldview after Jesus drastically changes. So let's see what he says.
This is a really terrifyingly alien world, and the more you look at it, the more you realise that it is built on systematic exploitation. Mm-hmm. So the entire economy is founded on slave labour. Right. The sexual economy is founded on the absolute right of free Roman males to have sex with anyone that they want, any way that they like. Mm. And in almost every way, this is a world that is unspeakably cruel to our way of thinking. Mm. And so this worried me more and more. And it was kind of like, I was thinking, well, you know, I'm clearly not, as I'd vaguely imagined, the heir of the Greeks and the Romans in any way, really. And so where am I coming from? And it was like a kind of itch, you know, you get on your back and you can't find it. And this was then enhanced for me by then writing a book about late antiquity and the emergence of Islam from the late religious the religious and imperial context of late antiquity, and again finding in Islam a profound quality of the alien. That there were aspects of Islam that were very familiar, but there were many aspects of it that again seemed deeply alien. And I began to realize that actually in almost every way I am Christian. And I began to realize that actually Paul...
So Tom Holland is not a believer. He identifies as an agnostic at best, right? And so he really is not cool with the supernatural aspects of really any religion, but he realizes that even living in the atheistic UK with an atheist worldview, when it comes to his morality, he is fundamentally Christian.
Although in many ways he seems a much less familiar figure than Cicero, the kind of urbane man with his property problems. Paul never had any property; he just made tents.
Yes.
That in almost every what is it, seven, that is the seven letters that are
people
conventionally people absolutely accept that, and as Tom Wright was...
Okay, so when he talks about Paul's letters, he's saying out of all of the letters of the New Testament, there are 7 letters that even the atheist scholars say Paul definitely wrote these. Right? So when he talks about the contested letters and the uncontested letters, he's actually saying that in scholarship, even scholars that are atheists or are Jewish, that are not Christian, even they say it's pretty clear the 7 letters, which includes 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Book of Romans, they are uncontested, which means even the non-Christian scholars are absolutely convinced Paul actually wrote these things. So that's worth mentioning.
Was saying, this is not a very lengthy amount of writing, but compacted into this very, very small amount of writing was almost everything that explains the modern world.
Well, the Western world, as we take for granted.
Yes, but also the way that the West has then moved on to shape, concepts like international law, for instance. So the fact, concepts of human rights, all these kind of things, ultimately, they don't go back to Greek philosophers. They don't go back to Roman imperialism. They go back to Paul.
Some of the humanists
Paul really
and atheists,
his letters, I think, are, along with the 4 Gospels, the most influential, the most impactful, the most revolutionary writings that have emerged from the ancient world.
When you penned that article, I think it was for the New Statesman, where you said what I got wrong, and you sort of came out, as it were, and said, as far as my values and background are concerned, I am a Christian. It was interesting to see the response to that, because I saw lots of atheists and humanists saying, "Oh, hang on, democracy, that goes back to the Greeks. Don't pretend that Christianity gave us everything we're grateful for." But you honestly think that actually people simply haven't appreciated just how much we owe to?
By the time you get to the 11th century in Latin Christendom, everything has changed, and you have this. I think essentially what's Paul's significance is that he sets up ripple effects of revolution throughout Western history. So the 11th century, where with the Papal Revolution, essentially it establishes this idea that society has to be reborn, reconfigured, that vested interests have to be torn down. And then the Reformation, what we call the Reformation, is a further ripple effect of that, and the Enlightenment is a further ripple effect of that. And it's spilled out so much that now in the 21st century we don't even realise where these ripple effects are coming from. We just take them for granted.
Okay. So what Tom Holland is trying to get at is that our worldview, our morality, it all stems from the Judeo-Christian worldview. That's really what Tom Holland is saying. Because even in the UK, where churches are closing down, when it comes to morality, and I think this is where we as I live in Canada. Some of you live in America, but really we in the West, we didn't just happen. And what I mean by that is one of the things that Holland points out in his book Dominion is his main thesis is this. Before Jesus, we thought as humans a certain way, right? Like before Jesus, the world had this brutal worldview. And part of the worldview is, especially during the time of the Romans, if you were a Roman, the only rights a person has is correlated with the amount of power and authority you have. So, for example, if you were a Roman soldier and you came back from battle, you had the right to have slaves, right? Like the idea of human rights didn't exist before Jesus. But Holland points out before Jesus, people had no problem with crucifying people, with torturing people to death, right? Like this is what was going on in Rome. Before Jesus, people were pawns, and there was no human rights. The only human rights that you had stemmed from how useful you were to the government. And the less useful you were, the less money you had, the less honor you had, the less power you had, made you more expendable. So if you were a child, you had no human rights. In fact, the fathers had, by law, by Roman law, they were able to disown their children and abandon them, and they weren't liable for their death if they abandoned their children. Also, Roman males, they had sexual rights to their slaves, whether male or female, and it didn't matter how old they were. Right? Like human rights really didn't exist in the ancient world. But Tom Holland, he points out that after the crucifixion, Christianity changed the world. And really his whole point is all of our ethics, all of our morality that we have today stems from the Judeo-Christian worldview. For example, why is it that you think that you believe in human rights? Do you know where the idea of human rights come from? It actually the idea of human rights actually comes from the book of Genesis, because in Genesis 1, I believe it's verses 26 and 27, it states this: "Let us create man in our image and in our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky." And then it says, "Therefore God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them." So the idea of being image bearers, being made in the image of God, actually makes life sacred. And there's something in us, in the West, we know this to be true. And the reason is because every once in a while, you'll be online, like there are debates where philosophers, they will debate morality, and part of the purely logical mindset, or the logical, I think some people call it the logic fallacy. The idea is this: if you become too logical, you will become illogical. For example, if you grow up in North America, or really anywhere in the West, anywhere that used to have a Christian influence, there's something in you that tells you every life is sacred. Human life is sacred, right? Like that's why we believe in human rights, is because we actually believe it doesn't matter if you're a baby, it doesn't matter if you're a child, it doesn't matter if you're a teenager, it doesn't matter if you're an adult, and it doesn't matter if you're a senior citizen. There's something in us that just knows life is sacred. And we are disgusted when we hear stories about what Adolf Hitler did to handicapped people. We're really disgusted when we hear about what Adolf Hitler did to the Jews, to children. And the only way to be able to separate that is for you to go against the Judeo-Christian worldview. But human rights is the fruit of Christianity. Why? Because 2,000 years ago, there was a faith healer, an apocalyptic prophet, that showed people that part of being human is through the suffering. That is actually why people are attracted to the cross. Because there's something in us that knows when the powerful step on top of the weak and the poor, there's something in us that knows there is no honor in that. Like, that is dishonorable. That is evil. Dare I say, that's sinful. When you have powerful people take advantage of the weak and the oppressed, there's something in us, we know that's evil. But if you go with a purely intellectual mindset, right, a pure logical mindset, there are people that will actually argue morality is actually fluid, which means that what makes something right or wrong depends on what the mass decides. So in essence, some people will actually argue there is no morality because we make our morality, right? But that actually requires that you believe that if enough people agreed with the Nazis, then murdering children would have been legal and moral. Right? But I know, even as I say this, there's something in you that's churning in your stomach. Why? Because you weren't raised in that worldview. You were actually raised in the Judeo-Christian worldview that actually states there is a right and there is a wrong, and morality matters, and the way you treat women and children matters, right? So you've actually inherited that. The whole reason you believe in human rights is because of Jesus of Nazareth. That is why your morality is what it is. Now think about this, okay? Think about this. Even the type of morality that goes against the Judeo-Christian worldview borrows from the Christian worldview. Okay, so this is what I mean. In order for a woman to be pro-choice, for you to argue that a woman has the right over her own body, okay, why? Why does anybody have a right to their own body? Why do I have a right to my own body? Why do I believe in rights? Why do I believe in human rights? Well, think about this. It all stems from the Judeo-Christian worldview, right? So, for example, in order to argue abortion, the argument is I have the right to do with my body what I want because it belongs to me. It doesn't belong to somebody else, right? Well, why do you believe in human rights at all? You believe in human rights because of the Judeo-Christian worldview. The worldview teaches you that you have rights. It teaches you your body is sacred, right? So even for you to fight for the right of an abortion, in order to fight the Christian worldview, you actually have to borrow from the Christian worldview in order to have the morality that you have, and for you to fight for your human rights. That comes from the Christian worldview too. And so what happens is even if you are fighting against Christian ethics, you have to borrow from the Christian worldview in order to attack the Christian worldview. You know, it's kind of like the idea in the second Thor movie, there's this great scene where Loki is drug in front of his father, King Odin, and he's into wearing chains and everything, and he tells his father to rule was my birthright. And Odin tells him, your birthright was to die. That was your birthright. And if it wasn't for me rescuing you, you would not be here to hate me, right? And so it's kind of like this idea, even when we blaspheme God, we have to use the air he gave us and the mouth he gave us in order to complain against him, right? So it's even like, even in order for us to complain about God, we have to use the life he gave us, the lungs he gave us, the air he gave us, in order to talk bad about our God. So what's going on with the new atheists? Well, what is happening is they've gotten exactly what they wanted. That is what's happening. They wanted Christianity to disappear in the West, and it's declining. We are now in a post-Christian nation, right? That's what's happening. But here's the interesting thing. Atheist numbers haven't grown in the decline of Christianity. Actually, and some of the, I think the new statistics are actually like 5% of the world's population are atheists, which means 95% of the world's population are religious and spiritual. And so that includes all of the religions, right? But what that actually means is that when you make Christianity go away, another religion is going to fill that hole. And what the atheists are starting to recognize is they're realizing Christianity actually wasn't that bad, right? Because I mean, really, the doctrine of Muhammad was a doctrine of the sword, and the doctrine of Jesus was the doctrine that the strong protect the weak. The strong don't behead the weak. The strong don't stomp on the throats of children, and right, like that is not the Judeo-Christian worldview. The Judeo-Christian worldview actually says it is honorable to love your neighbor, and it is dishonorable to eat your neighbor, right? That is the Judean Christian worldview. But the problem is now, what happens when you get rid of Christianity and the world is very religious? What happens is paganism. Paganism is what happens. Witchcraft is what happens. Instead of being self-sacrificial, you get darker religions that are just sacrificial. But they don't sacrifice themselves the way Jesus teaches on the cross. See, they don't have the way of the cross. They have the way of the sword. And so what happens is you exchange the self-sacrificial love of Christ, and instead what you get is you get the bloody sword of Muhammad. You get the blood sacrifices of witchcraft. You get whatever other dark things that can come out of the human mind that is not guided by the divine. Because Jesus shows the way from above. He shows the hard way. You know, like Jesus says, if anybody wants to follow me, you have to pick up your cross. You have to deny yourself. You need to do the right thing, even especially when the right thing is hard, right? But now what has happened is the atheists, what they want to do, the new atheists, not atheists in general, but what we are realizing is Christianity had some good fruit. And what happens is when you cut down the tree, the fruit dies. It stops producing fruit. If you poison the root of the tree, you're not going to keep the tree. And really what has happened is the new atheists, they have been cutting off the branch, but they didn't realize the branch is what was holding them up. And so what has happened is they've cut off the branch and they're halfway through and they realize they're going to fall. But the problem is you can't have the culture of Christianity without Christianity, because the fruit comes out of the health of the tree. But now what is happening is the tree has been cut down. We're now living in a post-Christian nation, and everybody's realizing, oh, those Christians were self-sacrificial. Those Christians were feeding the poor. Those Christians were taking care of the sick, right? Those Christians, what were they preaching? They were preaching the love of God, right? What does Muhammad preach? Jihad, right? These are not the same things. But we're realizing, and what Tom Holland gets at in his book is he realizes all of my morality, all of my ethics that I have, I don't think like a pagan. Like when it comes to my morality, he actually says, I'm Christian in every single way. And so what we're learning is even Richard Dawkins is a cultural Christian. And right now he is realizing the negative ramifications of what his books have done. Because he's realizing when you get rid of Christianity, you don't become more atheistic. You become more pagan. And then you realize Christianity rose for a reason. It rose because the fruit is actually things like kindness. It's things like love. It's things like human rights. It's things like pick up your cross, be self-sacrificial. And so now, but what this tells me is this is a great thing, especially if you're a Christian that cares about the lost. Why? Because people are going to start to see how evil the system of the world really is. And they're going to see Jesus and his teachings were right. They're going to start to say Jesus and his teachings were good. It is moral to be self-sacrificial. It is moral for men to be masculine, and it's moral for women to be feminine. But we're starting to see the more and more pagan we get, the more and more cultural problems there arises, to the point where now even the atheists that fought against the God of the Bible are saying, well, actually, maybe the religion we fought against wasn't so bad, right? And so, but it's never been a better time to be a believing Christian. Why? Because people, for the first time in my lifetime, people are seeing the value of the Bible. People are seeing the value of the Christian faith, and they want honor again, right? Like there's a reason why we're having the cultural conversations we're having. There's a reason why gender has become a huge topic in the culture. There's a reason why trad wives are a thing, right? There's a reason why men are growing beards now and most of them aren't clean shaven anymore. Like flannel. Like what is this doing? It's saying the world needs masculinity. And at the same time, the world needs femininity. Almost as if what was written in the book of Genesis, when God says, let us create mankind in our image and in our likeness. And then it says, God made the male and the female in the image of God. It's almost as if these ancient writings actually knew what they were talking about, right? But we're going to see as we go on, as we approach and go into this new pagan culture, what's going to happen is people are going to want to be evangelized again. People are going to hear the gospel. They're as our politicians continue to become more and more pagan, they're going to become more and more like Caesar. They're going to become more violent. They're going to become more dark in their thinking. They're going to become more vulgar. But then they're going to see the message of the cross. the way the ancient Romans saw the message of the cross. There's a reason why within about 300 years, Rome was Christian. And so I think this is the challenge now that the church has. We can either turn tail and run as we walk into this post-Christian time and this more paganized time, or we can look at the mission and we can see actually now can be a time of revival. Now can be a time of growth, because our culture has been so spoiled by the Judeo-Christian worldview. We have had so many human rights that we've become entitled. We've had so much prosperity because of the Judeo-Christian worldview. We've had so much prosperity that we think an angry tweet or an angry Facebook comment is persecution. No, you guys. Now is the time when all of that is going to go away. We're going to lose the fruit. We're going to start to lose the fact that we have human rights. We're going to start losing rights one by one by one by one. But what that's going to do, that's not a bad thing. Why? Because that's going to show you how crucial the Bible is. And that's going to show the pagans, when they're going to see the kingdom of God and the way the Christians live, and how the Christians are self-sacrificial, and how the Christians give and take care of the poor when they're not being paid to. When Christians do the right thing and live moral lives, when the whole culture doesn't, they're going to see that's honorable, and they're going to want that. And so my encouragement to anybody that's within the reach of my voice is this: Christianity has a lot to offer. The kingdom of God is powerful, and it breaks in, and when it breaks in, it conquers. And so we need to re-engage. If the church is going to survive, here's the choice we have, okay? As a Christian, this is your choice. You can either become like the world and your church will die, or you can embrace the message of the gospel. You can decide to be the church. And you can embrace the mission, which is to seek and to save the lost, to choose the way of the cross, to choose the way of the lamb, and to reject the way of the dragon. And when we do that, that's when we'll become the church. And I really believe we're going to start to see miracles again. Why? Because if we don't have them, we're going to die. But that's like, this is adventure. Like, this is good. This is how the church has conquered throughout history. And this is how the church is going to continue. We're going to spread the gospel. We're going to be forced to do the right thing, to be who you were meant to be. And so you can either choose to become a part of the paganism and to have your mind darkened, or you can choose the way of the cross. And as you die with Christ in baptism, you will be raised from the dead, and you will realize you were meant to be a world changer and not a ground shaker. And so go be the church, reach the lost, and follow Jesus wherever he leads you. Have a great day, my friends. God be with you.